So, you're building a high-performance storage cluster. You've got big plans. But there's this one decision that can totally make or break not just your budget, but your performance too. And that is 40 gig versus 100 gig networking. Today, we're diving right into that exact dilemma. Look, you've picked out all the good stuff, right? The fastest drives, the best CPUs, tons of RAM. Your cluster is an absolute beast on paper. But then you get to the network gear, and this one question pops up that can change everything. Do we really need to spend all that extra money on 100 gig? Okay, let's really get into this by looking at a super common scenario. Picture a systems architect, and they're designing this awesome 5-node Ceph cluster for Proxmox. Everything's going great until they hit a major crossroads with the network. And we are not talking about a small-time setup here. This is a high-stakes build. Each of these 5 servers is packed with 12 NVMe drives. You know, that's the crazy fast storage we all want. On top of that, it has terabytes of the latest DDR5 RAM. This thing is built for speed, pure and simple. But as our architects started pricing out the switches, well, the heart of the problem became painfully clear. The 40 gigabit gear, tempting, totally affordable. But the 100 gigabit switches they needed to really unlock all that hardware's potential? Whoa, we're talking 3 times the cost. So you might be thinking, just go with the cheaper option, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is Ceph. Because Ceph does not behave like your traditional storage. Its whole architecture just absolutely hammers the network in a way that other systems don't. See, the key thing to get about Ceph is that it isn't one single box. It's this distributed mesh of, well, they're called OSDs, which is basically each individual drive in your cluster. And every single time you write a piece of data, that action just echoes across the entire network as the cluster replicates, rebalances, and basically just talks to itself. It creates this constant, heavy network chatter. An engineer in the community discussion put it pretty bluntly. They basically said, look, if you're not going to use 100 gig networking, then there's no point in even buying those super fast NVMe drives and high-end CPUs. The point is, your system is only as fast as its slowest part. It's like buying a Ferrari and then trying to fuel it through a coffee stirrer. It just doesn't make sense. And that brings us to the perfect analogy. A single high-end NVMe drive can push something like 7 gigabytes per second. Now, multiply that by the 12 drives in just one of your servers, then add all that Ceph replication traffic on top, suddenly a 40 gigabit network starts to look less like a fire hose and more like a garden hose trying to fill a swimming pool. It becomes a massive bottleneck. Okay, but let's be fair. There is a case to be made for the cheaper, older standard. It's not totally obsolete, and hey, that price tag is really tempting. So let's actually explore the arguments for sticking with 40 gig for a minute. When you lay it all out, the trade-offs are pretty straightforward, right? 40 GB is cheap because, well, it's older tech. It's being phased out. 100 GB costs more, but it's the modern standard. It's what's happening now, and it has a clear path forward. One commenter in the discussion just absolutely nailed it. They said that saving a few thousand on the switches feels like painting a race car with discount house paint. And that's it, isn't it? When you've already spent so much money on all this premium hardware, skimping on the one thing that ties it all together, it just feels wrong. It undermines the whole point of the build. So when is 40 gig actually okay? Well, the consensus seems to be that it's still a totally viable choice for smaller clusters or for lighter workloads that aren't just hammering the storage 24/7. And this is a key point. It can also work if you use multiple bonded links to get more redundancy and throughput. All right, now let's flip the coin and make the case for 100 GBE. And you know what? This isn't just about getting the highest possible speeds during a normal Tuesday afternoon. It's about planning for the future and, more importantly, planning for when things go wrong. The big concept here is breathing room. That's what 100 gig networking gives you. It's the extra capacity to handle those unexpected traffic spikes, to let your cluster grow, and this is the most critical part, to handle system failures without grinding everything to a halt. And this right here, this is where the argument for 100 GBE really becomes crystal clear. Sooner or later, a drive is going to fail. It just happens. When it does, Ceph kicks into overdrive, frantically copying terabytes of data across the cluster to get its redundancy back. This is an incredibly intense, network-heavy operation, and this is the moment a 40 gig network will absolutely choke. A sysadmin put it perfectly. You might not max out your 100 gig link every single day, but on that one terrible night when a drive dies, that extra bandwidth is the difference between a quick, quiet recovery and hours of stress, bad performance, and just hoping nothing else breaks. It's about buying yourself some sleep. Best practices have really evolved here too. The old way of thinking was to have separate physical networks for the front end and back end traffic. That's kind of out. The modern approach is a single, unified, high-speed network. You manage all the traffic logically, using things like VLANs, which means you need simple, fast, and super reliable switches, exactly what 100 gigabit brings to the table. So, after hearing from all sides, the engineers, the admins, the builders who are actually doing this stuff, what's the final verdict? Let's boil all this community wisdom down into a clear takeaway. The consensus is pretty clear. 40 gig isn't dead, but its use case is shrinking. It's fine for smaller setups or lighter loads. But for any serious build that's heavy on NVMe drives, 100 gig is the safe, forward-looking bet. And really, the biggest takeaway is that a simple, redundant network is way more important than chasing some theoretical top speed. And at the end of the day, this whole decision isn't really about benchmarks on a spreadsheet. It's about building a system that's resilient and reliable. That extra cost for 100 GBE, think of it as an investment in future stability and in your own peace of mind. It helps to kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture. For years, all the parts of a server kind of improved at the same pace. But recently, storage and CPUs have just exploded in speed, leaving networking way behind. It's become the last major bottleneck. So 100 gig isn't really a luxury anymore. It's the new baseline you need just to keep up. And this quote just wraps the whole argument up perfectly. The real test of your network isn't on a quiet afternoon. It's in the middle of a crisis, when a drive is failing and you need every last bit of performance you can possibly squeeze out of the system. So we'll leave you with this last thought. In a world where storage and computing power are moving this incredibly fast, maybe the question isn't whether you can afford 100 gigabit networking. Maybe the real question is, can you afford to keep thinking in a 40 gig world?